The text message came in at 11:37 on a Tuesday night. I remember the time because I had just set my phone face down on the nightstand, finally ready to sleep after a 12-hour shift. My body was that specific kind of tired where even blinking feels like effort. I picked it back up out of habit. That terrible automatic habit, and there it was. You signed for that loan. Your name is on it. You either help your brother pay it back, or I tell your supervisor you've been forging documents at work. I have proof. You have until Friday. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. I read it twice, set the phone down, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My father sent that message. My father, who taught me to ride a bike in the parking lot of a Kroger on a Sunday morning. Who used to leave sticky notes in my lunchbox that said, "Proud of you, kid." That man had just threatened to end my career if I didn't pay for my brother's debt. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I don't catastrophize. I've been described by coworkers as methodical and measured, which I used to think were compliments, until I realized people mostly say those things about someone they consider boring. I work in internal compliance at a regional credit union. My job, literally, is to identify financial irregularities and report them. I audit loan paperwork for a living. I am the person your bank calls when something doesn't add up. So when my father told me he had proof I was forging documents, I didn't panic. I pulled up my credit report. The loan had been there for 4 months. I hadn't seen it because I hadn't looked. That sounds careless, and maybe it was, but I want to explain what my life looked like at that point. I was working 50-hour weeks. I was managing my mother's medication schedule remotely because she doesn't drive, and my brother, the same brother who took out this loan, had stopped answering her calls. I was sending money home every month, not a lot, but enough that I noticed when it left. I was tired in the way that makes you stop checking things you should be checking. The loan was for $3,400. It had been taken out in my name using my social security number, my address, my employment information. The application listed my income accurately, which told me whoever filled it out had access to my actual pay stubs. The funds had been deposited into an account that was not mine. I sat with that number for a while. $23,400. My brother's name wasn't on the application anywhere, but I knew. I'd known something was wrong for months. The new truck, the weekend trips he kept posting about, the way he'd suddenly stopped asking me to spot him cash. I'd told myself he'd finally gotten it together. I wanted that to be true. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't text back. I opened a new note on my phone and started writing down everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, the time he'd asked me for my pay stub to help fill out his own loan application. The time my mother mentioned he'd used her printer to make some financial documents. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I closed the note, locked my phone, and went to sleep. Because here's the thing about working in compliance, documentation is everything, and I had just started building mine. My brother and I had the kind of relationship that looks functional from a distance. We texted on birthdays. We showed up to the same holidays. We were polite to each other in the way that two people are polite when they have decided, mutually and silently, not to talk about the real things. He was always my parents' softer concern. I don't mean that cruelly, it's just accurate. He struggled with things I found easy, and I struggled with things he found easy, and somewhere along the way, my parents decided that meant he needed more. More patience, more money, more looking the other way. I was the one who had a plan. Plans, apparently, mean you don't need help. I paid my own way through college. He got his tuition covered because he was still figuring it out. I graduated, found a job, moved to a city 3 hours away. He bounced between apartments and borrowed money, and my parents explained it to me with that particular tone. Tired, apologetic, asking me to understand. I always understood. I was good at understanding. What I was not good at, apparently, was noticing when understanding had quietly become something else, something closer to being used. Wednesday morning, I called in a personal day, which I had not done in over 2 years. I drove to the credit union branch that originated the loan, not my employer, a different institution, And I sat across from a very patient woman named someone whose name I didn't catch because my ears were ringing, and I explained that I had not applied for this loan, had not received these funds, and had not authorized anyone to act on my behalf. She pulled up the application. The ID used was my driver's license. The signature on the final documents was not mine. I'm certain of this because I have a very deliberate signature, something my father always teased me about, and the one on those pages was rushed, loose, nothing like it. She couldn't tell me who had submitted the application in person. What she could tell me was the date, the branch location, and that the process had taken about 40 minutes. The branch was 12 minutes from my parents' house. I filed a fraud report before I left. I have a copy of every page. I photographed each one in the parking lot, standing next to my car in 40-degree weather with my hazards on because I'd parked slightly wrong and hadn't bothered to fix it. My father called Thursday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He left one. His voice was calm in the way that means he's decided on his approach in advance. I think you need to reconsider what you're doing here. Your brother made a mistake and he's dealing with it. You going to the bank is just going to make everything worse for the whole family. Call me back. He did not mention the text message. He did not mention the threat about my job. He spoke as though it had not happened, as though I had simply overreacted to something minor. I have learned, over a lifetime, that this is how my father handles accountability. He steps around it and acts confused when you point to the place where he was standing. I did not call back. I called my union's employee assistance line and quietly asked whether there was a legal consultation benefit on my plan. There was. I used it that afternoon. I want to be honest with you about how I felt during all of this. I was not triumphant. I was not executing some elegant revenge plan with cool efficiency. I cried in my car in the parking garage outside my building for about 20 minutes on Thursday evening. Not because I was sad, exactly. More because I had loved my father for 31 years and I was finally admitting something I had been refusing to admit for a long time. He had chosen my brother. Not once, not accidentally. Over and over, every time there was something to choose, he had chosen my brother, and he was willing to threaten my career, the thing I had built myself, from nothing, without any help from him, to keep protecting someone who had committed a crime against me. 20 minutes. Then I wiped my face, drove home, and made dinner. Friday came. I did not transfer any money. I did not respond to my father's texts, of which there were now 4. I did go to work, where I sat at my desk and did my job, and at no point was my supervisor called or my employment threatened, because my father does not actually have any proof of anything because I have not done anything wrong. That weekend, I made a list, not an emotional list, a practical one. I wrote down every account my family had any access to or knowledge of. I wrote down every piece of financial documentation that had ever passed through my parents' house, tax returns I'd printed there, a pay stub I'd emailed my mother to photocopy, the direct deposit form I'd filled out on their kitchen table when I'd first started my job and didn't have a printer. I thought about what a good attorney would call access and opportunity. I was building that case in my head even before I knew I was building it. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus that Saturday morning. It took about 11 minutes. Then I did something I had been thinking about for longer than I want to admit. I opened my laptop and checked the status of an application I had submitted 7 months earlier, a position at a firm in Portland, Oregon. I had applied on a slow afternoon, half convinced I wouldn't hear back, and then I had heard back almost immediately, and the process had moved forward, and I had kept going because each step was just one more step, and I hadn't told anyone because I hadn't been ready to call it real. It was real now. The offer had a start date. I hadn't accepted yet. I accepted. I need to tell you about the Friday before I left, because this is the part I think about most. My brother came to my apartment. He didn't call first. He never calls first. That's always been his way, showing up and expecting to be let in, because historically he has always been let in. I watched him on the security camera feed for a moment before I opened the door. He was wearing the jacket he'd had since college, the one with the fraying cuffs, and he looked tired. I felt something move in my chest that I didn't want to feel. I opened the door. He came in and sat on my couch and looked around my apartment the way he always does, like he's taking inventory. Then he said, "Dad said you filed a fraud report." I said yes. He said, "You know what that's going to do to me?" I said I did. He looked at me for a long moment. He was waiting for me to fill the silence. I have always filled the silence. My whole life, I have been the one who smooths things over, who explains, who offers the exit ramp. I sat with my hands in my lap and I didn't say anything. He said, "It was just supposed to be temporary. I was going to pay it back." I said, "With what money?" He didn't answer. He looked at the floor. Here is what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that I'd been sending money home for 4 years. I wanted to say that I had skipped a vacation I'd been planning for 2 years because I felt guilty spending money on myself when my family needed it. I wanted to say that I had lied to coworkers about why I couldn't come to happy hour, because the real reason was that I was trying to save every dollar I could, and the truth of that was too embarrassing to explain. I wanted to say that I had run myself down to a kind of flatness and he had gone and taken out a loan in my name and my father had responded by threatening my job. And the loan was for $23,400, which happened to be almost exactly what I had managed to save after 4 years of all of that. I didn't say any of it. I said, "You should go." He left. He didn't apologize. I didn't expect him to. I've been told that what happened next was partly lucky and partly not. I'll let you decide. My brother, apparently, had made arrangements to access a second financial account. Not a loan this time, but an investment account I had opened 2 years earlier through my employer's brokerage. I didn't know he'd gotten the account number until the compliance officer at that brokerage called me. They had flagged a login attempt from an unrecognized device and location. The attempt had failed because I had two-factor authentication enabled, something I had set up 2 years ago as a matter of professional habit, not because I was protecting myself from my own family. The failed login was traceable. It came from a device registered at my parents' address. At this point, I had been in contact with a fraud attorney for 10 days. The attorney was not surprised. She said, "This is actually helpful." My father texted me one more time, the Tuesday before I left. He had somehow heard, through my mother, I think, who had heard from my brother, that I was planning to move. His message said I was being dramatic, that I was punishing the family for one mistake, that I would regret this. One mistake. That's what he called it. I took a screenshot of every message he had sent me since that first Tuesday night. I forwarded them to my attorney, then I forwarded them to my employer's HR department, because my father had threatened my employment in writing and I wanted that on record before I no longer worked there. HR thanked me for the documentation. They said they had no concerns about my employment history, which had never involved document forgery or anything approaching it. They opened a note in my file and said they were sorry I'd been dealing with this. I will not tell you the exact logistics of how I left because some of it is still pending, and my attorney advised me to keep certain details private for now. What I can tell you is that I had been in Portland once for a work conference in the rain, and I had thought I could live here. That thought had lasted about 3 seconds before I'd pushed it away, because leaving felt like a luxury I hadn't earned, or maybe a betrayal I wasn't entitled to. I packed my apartment in 8 days. I sold what I couldn't take. I called a moving company and got a quote and paid the deposit. I went to the post office and filed a change of address that did not include my parents' house. I did not tell my father I was leaving. I did not tell my brother. I told my mother, who cried, and who said things that were difficult to hear, and who ultimately did not try to stop me in any concrete way. We have not spoken since. I hope that changes someday, but I've stopped arranging my life around hope that isn't grounded in evidence. My last night in my old apartment, I stood in the middle of the empty living room and listened to the sounds the building made, the elevator, a neighbor's TV, traffic from the street below. I had lived there for 4 years. I had made it exactly as comfortable as I could afford to, and then I had quietly sent money away from it every month, and now I was leaving it. I didn't feel sad. I felt like I was the right size for my own life for the first time in a long time. The fraud case is ongoing. I cannot tell you how it will end because it hasn't ended yet. What I can tell you is that the documentation I built, the screenshots, the fraud report, the timeline of access and opportunity, the failed login attempt, is substantial. My attorney describes it as thorough. She said that in the same tone my coworkers use when they call me methodical. I've decided to take it as the compliment it is. My father has not contacted me since I arrived in Portland. I don't know if that's because he's realized he overstepped or because he's waiting for something. I've found that I'm not particularly interested in finding out. I have a studio apartment with a window that looks out over a hill and, on clear days, a slice of the kind of sky that feels deliberately large. I make my own coffee in the morning. I check my credit report every 2 weeks. I have set up alerts on every financial account I own, something I should have done years ago and didn't. And I have chosen not to be too hard on myself about that. Someone asked me recently whether I regret not confronting my brother more directly, whether I wish I had said all the things I didn't say that day on my couch. I thought about it honestly. No. The things I didn't say were for my benefit, not his. Saying them would have felt like an explanation, an invitation to negotiate. And I was done negotiating. Some people, when they realize they've been your safety net, will grab hold before you can pull it away. The only solution is to be already gone before they reach for it. I left my old SIM card in a drawer in the empty apartment. I don't know if I left it deliberately or if I just forgot it. Either way, I didn't go back.